dive into a little bit of Web3 gaming today and take a look at one of the projects on Solana that you may have not heard about and you don't want to miss. It's going to be a good one. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. And if you look at some of the comparisons, DayZ is a good example. I mean, you kind of see this lull back here in 2018. This is a 10-year-old game. But again, these genres are potential. So joining me today is Stephen Arnold, who is the CEO and creative director over at Decimated. Great to have you, Stephen.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for getting me on the show. It's a pleasure to meet you.
For sure. Let's get into a little bit about Decimated as a whole. I want to give us, just a brief explanation of your team, the experience. Your background's pretty extensive in Web 2 gaming, so obviously Web 3, new game for you. Tell me a little bit about your story.
Sure. So, I've been working in the video games industry for around 16 years of my career. Prior to that, I was working in music production and sound design. And from 2008, my career kind of went through various different aspects of video game production, from QA testing to localization, voiceover, and then later into art, animation, cinematics, and VFX production, working in motion capture stages, doing previs, storyboards, and really kind of working on a lot of the cinematic content for video games. During that time, I was also working on my own projects as well, supervising small teams. And then in 2017, I started working on Decimated. Now, the project that we've been building over the last few years, it's been 6 years now, has obviously gone through the whole startup Death Valley phase, where we started the project really, really early, maybe a bit too early for the Web3 sector, I kind of saw that using Web3 in video games was going to be the future, but this was around 2017, 2018, when I was trying to build something that had Web3 integration. It wasn't until 2021 that we finally raised capital and we were able to scale up the team with more developers from other AAA game studios, including People Can Fly, Ubisoft, Jagex, and several others. So, yeah, I mean, in my career, I've worked on many projects, including, we were like an external partner for bigger studios like Ubisoft, 2K Games, Gearbox Software, Warner Brothers, Montreal, etc. But my career brought me a lot of expertise through all different aspects of video game production. Decimated is a very, very big and ambitious project. I couldn't do it without the people that we have on board. So I'm really, really happy to have a really solid team of developers on board now.
Hey, in terms of being able to acquire capital, most gaming studios, especially in the Web 2, that's been a fairly easy task up until here recently. But what about people that are really, do you have to get investors that really are plugged into Web3, or are you finding people that are investing that are coming over from maybe the Web 2 gaming space? What's been your experience?
I definitely think 100% you have Web3 investors that are investing in Web3 games. I think a lot of traditional investors in the video game space are not so much interested in it, in that type of project, because of they see it as high risk, and also because there's really not that much mass adoption yet from the traditional gamers. So a lot of investors from the traditional space don't want to back a project that may fail. I think that it's actually not easy to raise money from the traditional video game investors either. There's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of people that are making games, lots of indie game developers. They're inundated with lots of projects, when they go to conferences and people pitching their projects. And the same with us. I was pitching Decimated for many years, from 2018 until 2021, and largely been met with rejection from all of the Web3 investors who weren't interested in gaming at that moment in time, and traditional video game investors and publishers as well, who were skeptical about the Web3 aspect. But then, of course, in 2021, we raised 100% of our capital from Web3 aficionados, who were suddenly interested in Web3 gaming because the narrative had changed and more people were interested in GameFi. And it was almost like, I'd been telling them, I've been saying this for years, that GameFi was going to be the future, but it took the rest of the world to catch up with the demand, So I think that now there's a lot more interest from the traditional video game VCs, but I think they prefer to wait until you've either launched your product, or you have product market fit, or you have a huge community, so that then there's obviously a huge demand for your project. If you have, I think that a lot of people in the Web3 space have been lucky enough to be able to raise capital with just a cinematic trailer and a pitch deck, maybe some tokenomics and a white paper. Mm-hmm. You can't do that in the video games industry. You need to have a product. You need to have a prototype, a playable game, and a whole, a game design document and everything prepared in advance before you'll see any money from VCs. So, but I think that it's still really difficult to raise capital in any case. It's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life. And I think I was really lucky just because of timing and really being persistent with the project for many years and not giving up. And then, of course, when people were interested in GameFi and Web3 gaming, thankfully, we'd already spent many years developing a project and proving the business model. So yeah.
Well, I mean, the good thing is you stayed in it, and I think that, and for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially that are coming into this space, that's the one thing I try to tell a lot of projects that I talk to all often is, hey, listen, many of these overnight successes take years, sometimes decades, to really develop into the future. So you have to think it through. What about platforms right now? I know you guys are cross-platform, but what has been your strategy, from a roadmap standpoint, to go into platforms right now?
Yeah, so our first priority is to develop the game for PC and mouse and keyboard, and then later we'll optimize the controls for Xbox controller. The plan is to then have the game ported onto PlayStation and Xbox in the future, but that'll be long after the PC version is considered a final beta. So we're currently in closed alpha. People are playtesting the game right now. Our community are playtesting. The beta will be in 2025. Around that time, we'll probably work with external partners to help us port the game onto PlayStation and Xbox. And of course, we could also port the game down to a mobile version, which would obviously open up the floodgates for a lot of people from Southeast Asia and other regions where they don't have PCs. But typically, I mean, big traditional video game studios that are working on AAA projects like we're aiming to achieve, they'll maybe work on the PC and the PlayStation Xbox versions in parallel, but publishing a game on console is quite a challenge. There's a lot of compliance and regulation, and everything needs to be developed to a certain standard for PlayStation, Xbox, which is something that we plan to delve into later after we've done the PC version. So, and as you mentioned, you already mentioned games like DayZ, Cyberpunk 2077, and some of the other games that we take inspiration from. DayZ, for example, it was predominantly a PC game. And the games that we're basing Decimated on, which are a lot of Arma mods like PUBG and Arma Wasteland and DayZ, they were all PC games. So we're going for the PC target market. That's our target demographic. And then console in the future, for sure.
We've already seen some pretty good successes with things like Off the Grid. I think it's going to be a good success with Off the Grid. But the interesting thing to me is the viral nature of some of these studios that have been able to kind of break the ceiling. You look at Pal World and just their success. I saw the numbers just this week: 25 million players in a month. I mean, that's a viral sensation. So I'm just waiting for that moment in the Web3 space. So I'm very excited about the potential for that. What about your roadmap? What does that look like? You mentioned 2025, first PC. Would it be mobile or Xbox porting first? What would be kind of the next step for you? This is 24 and 25 kind of coming up in your roadmap.
As I mentioned, we're in closed alpha testing. So we have hundreds of people that are playing the game now, reporting bugs, giving us some feedback, helping us with the balancing of the weapons and the vehicles and the movement and the vaulting and parkour movements. We plan to do a patch for the closed alpha in the next few weeks so that people can see some of the progress that we've been working on over the last few months, because the closed alpha was launched in December 2023. So I think that in March, we'll be updating the project for people to see some missions and some other exciting features, vehicle improvements, physics, and also a lot of improvements with optimization as well, because this is really important, especially for open world games like this. Beyond that, we plan to have the full game released by the end of this year, by the end of 2024. And at that point, we won't be adding in any more features. It'll really just be bug fixes, and then the live ops stage where we're dealing with support requests and adding new content to the marketplace, like new vehicles and skins and weapons, etc. So beyond that stage, we won't say adding more features. We'll consider that the project is a complete game, and it'll just be giving people things to do inside the game and content to buy and use. But with regards to the console and mobile porting, we haven't decided what the priority would be. I think it really depends largely on the success of the PC version. But I think that porting to mobile would be a lot easier. I think it could be an easier platform to target. And it also would open up a much wider audience, because we could potentially have tens of millions of downloads on the mobile platforms. As I mentioned previously, the compliance requirements for publishing a game on PlayStation or Xbox are very strict. often when game developers publish their games on PlayStation, Xbox, there's a lot of issues with the first release version, because that's the version that they had to get put through for approval through PlayStation and Microsoft. And then they have the day one patch, which is all of the updates they've done during that whole time that they've had to go through the approval process with the console manufacturers. So yeah, this is something that we would need support with, and any Web3 game developers who are developing games that could potentially be used or played on PC or console will most likely use external support to help them port their games onto the console, because it is such a rigorous task.
Solana has been I think it's a good selection for you guys in terms of transactions. Was that the reason solely that you guys were looking at the Solana chain to launch on?
Well, there was a few reasons. I mean, back in 2018, 2019, prototyped a version of Decimated in Unreal Engine 4 with a plugin called Ether Linker, which linked the Ethereum blockchain into the Unreal Engine. But we found it to be very slow and expensive even back then. And then obviously by the time that we raised capital in 2021, it was even more expensive and slower, of course, right? There's a lot more projects on Ethereum by that point in time. So we evaluated all the different chains that we were aware of at that time, including Avalanche and Solana, Polygon, Immutable X, and others. And I think that the reason that we chose Solana was largely, it was a group decision between ourselves, the investors, and the advisors about which would be the best chain to work with based on the fact that we're building something in Unreal Engine 5. Star Atlas were one that we were looking at. They were also using Solana as well. The transaction speed and the low transaction fees, yes, were certainly of interest to us. But also the fact that we read in the documentation that on Solana you can write on chain in C++, which is what we're developing the game in as well. But as it turns out, we're actually using Solana very, very loosely. I think that we're not building anything on chain inside the game. It's still a kind of Web 2 game running on AWS servers with Microsoft PlayFab. The difference is that we have custodial wallets. Yeah.
Right. So you're saying that most of these assets would be off-chain?
Yeah, I mean, none of our in-game items are going to be NFTs or on the blockchain whatsoever. It's just going to be our token and our profile pictures as well. And the users will have their own custodial wallet integrated into their player profile. So when they register an account, either through Steam or Epic Store or on our website, when they make purchases, then a custodial wallet will be created, and then they can make transactions with the tokens that way.
So that's where DIO comes into play, which is the token side of things on this. What is going to be available for purchase other than obviously the in-game playable goods, all sorts of strategies, cars, armor, all that kind of stuff?
We have so much content already. There's a screenshot here where you can see a character in front of a vending machine. So we have a lot of consumables in game, food, drink, ammo clips, shield power, fuel, jetpacks, weapons and skins, vehicles and skins. And at a later stage, we also plan to sell buildings like shops and things like this that players can buy. So then they can sell consumables to the other players. One thing that we would really like to include in the future as well is more PvE content, so that certain players will go out and create resources that other players want to buy. So the ones that are out grinding, they're spending their time to create items, and then they can sell them to other players in exchange for DIO tokens. So this is our later stage type of content that we're going to integrate.
I was talking with our team, we got a chance to play it, within our game studio, and they've given us some feedback, much of what you've addressed, there around more stuff to do within the game itself. But one thing was the stakes, kind of the survival stakes themselves, is that, if you die, do you lose all of your, your acquired assets that you've done in game? What has been the strategy for gameplay when you look at that? Is that seems a little bit risky.
Strict.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the attraction with these types of games. The reason that people really love to play games like DayZ and Arma Wasteland and PUBG is because of the permadeath feature, right? So if you die, then you're out of the game and you have to go back to the beginning. Yeah. Now, of course, the players they're not going to risk anything that's extremely valuable. They're going to be buying lots of consumables to be able to compete effectively with other players, against other players, to undertake missions and then receive a reward at the end, right? But of course, if somebody has bought a really expensive vehicle and then some other player kills them and then drives away with it, then after that vehicle has been destroyed, it will be restored back into the player's garage. For example, like you can see here, the buggy on screen. But a lot of the consumables, it will be fair game. If you get killed by another player, you could get everything looted, your weapon, your ammo, some consumables like food and drink and things like this. That's all part of the experience. We want the game to be a very tense and a very emotional experience where people feel scared that there's other players around, not just everybody shooting each other. We want people to be more tactical. But another thing to bear in mind is that we are introducing the unconscious state system as well. So you won't necessarily be killed every single time you get shot. You can also be knocked unconscious or bleed out, and then you can be healed by a medic. So you still have a fighting chance of survival. It's just a question of whether another player is going to loot your body while you're unconscious or not.
While you're down.
Players of DayZ know exactly like what we're aiming to do here. So it's, and I think that it makes the game really exciting. The fact that if I get shot now, then I could potentially lose everything. But of course, we do have safeguards in place that if people have bought a vehicle for say $50 worth of tokens, for example, it would be unfair for somebody to be able to steal that inside the game and then drive away with it. So we're going to have safeguards in place for that, so people can have their expensive items restored back to them after they've been destroyed.
So not complete looter mayhem like you might see on Mad Max. I was looking at your website, the blockchain architecture. So possibility that Decimated will go cross-chain in the future on ETH, Polygon, Solana, and then using potentially a bridge protocol here, such as Wormhole. Why not? And also, why not Avalanche? I mean, Avalanche has moved quickly into the gaming ecosystem. You look at Pulsar. I mean, these guys have absolutely decimated transactions. 3 million almost now. I mean, and this is their subnet, their testnet, I should say, and continue to do very well. This is what I think is going to happen with a lot of Web3 games in the essence of needing full transactions, which could happen with you guys. I mean, it sounds like you're building quite an ecosystem here.
We aim to, yes. I mean, we also don't want to overcomplicate the project more than it already is. I think working with one chain is already quite an undertaking. We're working with Stardust, who are the custodial wallet provider. They also offer payments and an NFT marketplace as well, which we're not using because we have our own payment gateway and marketplace that we've developed internally. But Stardust have the functionality for Solana, Polygon, Ethereum, and I think Sui chain as well. Okay. And so there is the possibility that we could allow the users to be able to choose which chain they would like to withdraw on. But at the same time, is it really necessary? Because where would they want to withdraw to? Either their private wallet or to a decentralized exchange, or maybe to an external NFT marketplace like OpenSea or Magic Eden, for example. So I think that Solana is probably sufficient enough. And I think the information that's been written on the website is quite old now. So it's good that you brought that up, because I'll make sure that that's up to date.
Well, it's good. I mean, obviously, we want to see as much cross-chain as possible. Within the ecosystem, I look over at things like Star Atlas, which they're advancing pretty aggressively. I was just looking at some of their designs on their guns. These would be perfect for some sort of partnership with Star Atlas. This is a great and excellent cross-chain. Well, not necessarily in this particular case, Star Atlas on Solana. But what about things like that? Those kind of partnerships or collabs?
I mean, we've spoken to the marketing team at Star Atlas in the past. We've never actually had an official partnership announced so far with some other projects such as Shrapnel, Citizen Conflict, and several others that are also building their games in Unreal Engine 5. But I mean, I'm more of a devil's advocate when it comes to interoperability between games. And the reason being is that every single game has their own code base and naming conventions for all of their textures and models and characters, and the joints for the character animations and physics settings and things like this. So I think that it's a dream for there to be interoperability with all different games, even if they are also built in the same game engine, because you technically need to be building the games together in parallel with exactly the same architecture, with the same naming conventions, the same folder structure, and unless you do that, you basically have to duplicate all of the assets for each of the games that they're being used in, But who knows? I mean, obviously with AI and advancing technology, maybe it might be easier in the future, but at the moment, it's hard enough to make one game, and equally hard to make two games that are developed by two separate dev teams interoperable. I mean, a good example would be the developers of Mass Effect, BioWare, they were typically developing Mass Effect in Unreal Engine, but then when they were acquired by Electronic Arts made them switch over to their own engine, Frostbite, and trying to build a game in a completely new engine that's already been developed and is kind of like Mass Effect 1, Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3. Okay, now we want to make it in our own proprietary engine. Then there was loads of bugs, there was issues with animations and things like this, and a lot of people complained about it. It's a real technical challenge. Making games is one of the hardest things that anyone could ever do. So yeah, there's a lot of technical challenges involved with interoperability, I would say.
For sure. Well, you guys, of course, are always asking, that are watching right now, make sure and like the video. If you do like us covering the Web3 side, if you want to learn a little bit more about Decimated, jump over to their website, just decimated.net. You can kind of get in on that. And of course, the token, DIO, it's one to watch. I mean, here's the all-time right here, but if you look at the last year, a little bit of growth here, starting to stabilize. It would be an interesting one to kind of keep an eye on as well if you're looking at trading some altcoins out there. Hey, Stephen, it's been great having you on the show. Thanks so much for stopping in today. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. Great talking to you. Thanks.
You bet. All right. So you guys are listening, maybe on the audio side of this, make sure and jump over and get the full, graphic version of our show, because this really breaks down a lot of what's happening in the game ecosystem. And when we cover, altcoins, we dive into, obviously, the big caps, which is what's happening right now within the marketplace. If you're watching this video while Bitcoin is pretty much flying and ETH is hitting 3,500, a lot happening in the market. Make sure and subscribe. That's the number one thing you can do. For our live streams, hit that little bell. It's going to give you a notification when we do go live. And if you're not in the Diamond Circle, get in there right now. It's a link down below. Catch me on X at Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.